In February 2025, Ducati built an engine so revolutionary that MotoGP officials forced them to bury it before a single race. 240 horsepower of Italian fury with technology so advanced it made rivals panic. But what if the ban wasn't about fairness? What if something darker was happening? Picture this. You're sitting in a conference room in Thailand. Outside, the world's fastest motorcycles are screaming around the Buriram circuit. Inside, men in suits are deciding the fate of what could have been the most dominant race engine ever built. This is exactly what happened on February 13, 2025. And by the end of that meeting, Ducati's revolutionary GP25 engine was effectively dead. But let's rewind, because to understand why one prototype engine could cause such chaos, you need to see what Ducati had been doing to MotoGP for the past 3 years. Since 2022, the red bikes from Bologna had been absolutely crushing the competition. We're talking 35 race wins out of 54 races, 2 riders' championships, 3 constructor titles in a row. Francesco Bagnaia and Jorge Martin weren't just winning, they were dominating. And here's the thing about MotoGP. When one manufacturer gets too good, the others don't just work harder. They start complaining, they start lobbying, they start demanding rule changes. Think about it from their perspective. You're Honda, the company that built the most successful racing engines in history. Your NSR 502 strokes won 8 straight championships in the 1990s. Your RC211V 4-stroke dominated the early 2000s. You've got more engineering resources than God himself. And some Italian company with 1/10 of your budget is making you look like amateurs every single weekend. That's humiliating. That's the kind of thing that gets people fired in Japan. When your corporate culture is built around engineering excellence, and some guys in Bologna are out engineering you with passion and pasta sauce, heads are going to roll. By late 2024, Ducati was carrying the weight of being too successful. Limited testing time. Only 7 engines per season instead of 9. A 2-year freeze on major engine changes. The FIM had basically put handcuffs on Ducati's engineers. But here's what makes this story even more incredible. These penalties weren't created specifically for Ducati. They're part of a concession system that's supposed to help struggling manufacturers catch up. When you're winning too much, you get handicapped. When you're losing, you get help. The problem is, Ducati had figured out how to win despite the handicaps. While Honda and Yamaha were getting extra testing days and development freedom, the red bikes kept getting faster anyway. But Gigi Dall'Igna, Ducati's technical mastermind, isn't the type of guy who gives up easily. While his rivals were crying about fairness, he was cooking up something special in the Bologna workshops. This is a man who revolutionized aerodynamics in MotoGP. Before Dall'Igna arrived at Ducati in 2014, wings on motorcycles were considered insane, too dangerous, too complicated, impossible to make work. 3 years later, every single bike on the grid had wings, not because the other manufacturers wanted them, but because they couldn't compete without them. That's the Dall'Igna effect. He doesn't just bend rules, he rewrites the entire playbook. Enter the GP25 engine. Now, on paper, this thing didn't look like a revolution. Still 1000cc like the current bikes. Still a V4 layout like every Ducati before it. But underneath that familiar exterior was technology that would make Formula One engineers jealous. The stroke was shorter, which meant the pistons didn't have to travel as far. That sounds boring until you realize shorter stroke equals higher revs equals more power. The valve throats were redesigned and angled differently to create better airflow into the combustion chambers. But here's where it gets really interesting. Ducati had figured out a way to change valve timing mechanically, not electronically, because that's banned, not hydraulically, because that's also banned. Mechanically, think of it like this. As the engine spins faster, centrifugal force moves little balls inside the camshaft. These balls push against ramps that slightly advance or retard the cam timing. More aggressive timing at high RPM for maximum power. Gentler timing at low RPM for better drivability. It's basically the same principle that makes those old centrifugal governors work on steam engines. Ancient technology applied to cutting-edge racing. The kind of lateral thinking that makes Dall'Igna so dangerous to his competitors. Genius? Absolutely. Legal? That's where things get complicated. See, MotoGP has very specific rules about variable valve timing. Electronic systems are banned. Hydraulic systems are banned. But mechanical systems that change automatically based on engine speed? That's a gray area that Ducati thought they could exploit. They weren't the first to try this. Suzuki used a similar system on their road bikes back in 2016. But road bikes don't have to follow MotoGP rules. The moment you put this technology on a prototype racer, everything changes. The GP25 also featured something called mid-stroke swirl chambers. These are tiny pockets machined into the top of each piston that create turbulence in the fuel-air mixture. Better turbulence means more complete combustion. More complete combustion means more power. They borrowed this trick directly from Formula One, where pre-chamber technology has been pushing the boundaries of internal combustion efficiency. But adapting F1 tech to a motorcycle engine isn't simple. The cooling demands are different. The vibration patterns are different. The fuel delivery systems are completely different. Here's what most people don't understand about motorcycle engines versus car engines. In Formula One, you've got massive radiators, sophisticated cooling systems, and relatively gentle vibration patterns. In MotoGP, you've got maybe 1/10 the cooling capacity and vibration levels that would shake an F1 engine apart. Making F1 combustion technology work in a motorcycle requires completely rethinking how heat flows through the engine. Every surface has to be optimized. Every coolant passage has to be perfect. One small mistake and your revolutionary engine becomes an expensive paperweight. Ducati's engineers had also redesigned the entire gearbox. Instead of the traditional inline layout, they stacked the gears vertically. This made the whole engine shorter and lighter. Less rotating mass means the bike accelerates faster and changes direction quicker. The vertical gear stacking sounds simple, but it's actually a nightmare to implement. You have to completely rework the oil circulation system because now the gears are at different heights. The lubrication patterns change. The load distributions change. The thermal management becomes exponentially more complex. And then there was the balance shaft. This counter-rotating shaft was tuned specifically for the new firing intervals created by the cam phasing system. Its job was to eliminate the rear tire hop that plagued earlier Ducati engines under hard engine braking. Balance shafts aren't new technology. They've been used in car engines for decades to smooth out vibrations. But tuning one for a motorcycle with variable cam timing? That requires computer modeling that would make NASA jealous. Each of these innovations was legal on its own, but put them all together, and you had an engine that pushed every single boundary in the MotoGP rulebook. The first signs of trouble came during winter testing. Marc Marquez, fresh from his move to the factory Ducati team, kept telling Italian journalists that the 2024 engine was still the reference. That's racing speak for this new thing isn't working right. Now you have to understand something about Marquez. This guy has won 6 MotoGP championships. He's ridden everything from underpowered Hondas to rocket ship Ducatis. When he says an engine isn't right, people listen. Marquez doesn't sugarcoat his feedback either. Spanish riders are famous for being brutally honest about bike performance. If the new engine was even slightly better, he would have said so. The fact that he kept praising the old engine was a massive red flag. Pecco Bagnaia, the defending world champion, echoed those concerns. These aren't guys who sugarcoat their feedback. If they say the old engine is better, they mean it. Bagnaia is different from Marquez. Where the Spaniard is all instinct and aggression, Bagnaia is clinical and technical. He can feel a 1% change in engine character and explain exactly what's happening. If both riders were saying the GP25 wasn't working, the engineers knew they had a problem. But behind the scenes, something else was brewing. Rumors started spreading through the paddock that under certain conditions, the GP25 was exceeding the maximum fuel flow rate. The Unified Electronic Control Unit is supposed to prevent this, but somehow the new engine was finding ways around the limit. The fuel flow issue is massive in modern MotoGP. Each bike gets exactly 22 liters of fuel for a race. That's it, no more. The ECU monitors fuel consumption thousands of times per second to ensure nobody cheats. But here's the dirty secret. The ECU isn't perfect. There are tiny windows during acceleration where the fuel flow spikes above the legal limit for microseconds. Usually this doesn't matter because the average stays under the limit. The GP25's cam phasing system was apparently creating fuel delivery patterns that exploited these microsecond windows. Not intentionally, but as a side effect of the optimized valve timing. It was like finding a loophole in the laws of physics. Even if this was accidental, even if it only happened for milliseconds at a time, the FIM made it clear that any breach during post-race inspection would mean immediate disqualification. Now here's where the politics get dirty. Aprilia, KTM, and Honda had all been burned by Ducati innovations before. Remember the wing wars of 2016? Remember the hole-shot devices that Ducati pioneered? Remember the tire cooling scoops that other manufacturers claimed were actually aerodynamic devices? Every time Ducati found a loophole, their rivals screamed bloody murder. And every time, Ducati managed to keep their innovations legal through clever interpretation of the rules. The wing controversy was particularly bitter. Ducati showed up to a race in 2016 with these tiny winglets on their fairing. Other manufacturers laughed. Wings on a motorcycle? Ridiculous, dangerous, pointless. 6 months later, every bike on the grid had wings. Not small ones either. Massive, complex, multi-element aerodynamic packages that produced hundreds of pounds of downforce. The entire sport had been revolutionized overnight. The hole-shot device story was even more frustrating for Ducati's rivals. This system mechanically lowers the rear of the bike at the start of a race, improving acceleration by preventing wheelies. Ducati developed it, used it to dominate starts for 2 years, and then watched everyone else copy it. But this time felt different. This time, the other manufacturers had ammunition. They pointed back to 2019, when 4 factories protested Ducati's swing arm mounted tire cooling scoop. They claimed it was really a downforce device disguised as a cooling system. Ducati won that legal battle, but the other manufacturers never forgot. The scoop controversy revealed just how petty the politics had become. The device genuinely did cool the tire, but it also happened to generate a tiny amount of downforce. Was it a cooling system or an aerodynamic device? The technical tribunal sided with Ducati, but the vote was close. Yamaha reminded everyone about their own 2020 punishment for running unapproved valves. They got slammed with a 50-point penalty in the Constructors' Championship for what was essentially a paperwork error. Their message was clear. If we got punished for a mistake, Ducati should get punished for pushing the rules too hard. The Yamaha valve situation was particularly unfair. They had received faulty valves from their supplier, replaced them with correct ones, but failed to notify the technical committee within the required time frame. No performance advantage, no attempt to cheat, just a paperwork mistake that cost them a championship. The pressure was building, and on February 13th, it all came to a head. The meeting in the Burrum Control Tower was supposed to be routine. Technical Director Danny Aldridge, Dorna Sporting Director Carlos Espeleta, and representatives from all the manufacturers. Standard pre-season regulatory review. But when Ducati presented their GP25 engine for final homologation approval, the room temperature dropped 10 degrees. The debate centered on 2 specific rule clauses. First, variable valve timing systems, driven by electronic or hydraulic means, are prohibited. Second, mechanical devices that alter valve timing must be purely passive, fixed, and not self-actuated by engine speed or load. Ducati argued their cam phasing system was completely passive. No sensors, no solenoids, no electronic control, just centrifugal force acting on mechanical components. The FIM lawyers saw it differently. They argued that any system that changes valve timing based on engine speed is, by definition, self-actuating. It doesn't matter if it's mechanical. If it responds to operating conditions, it's active, not passive. This might sound like legal hair splitting, but in MotoGP, entire championships have been decided by single words in the rulebook. The argument went on for hours. Ducati's lawyers had prepared for this fight. They brought technical drawings, engineering reports, and precedent cases from other racing series. They argued that centrifugal force is a natural phenomenon, not an active control system. The FIM countered with their own technical experts. They pointed out that the system was designed to change behavior based on operating conditions. That makes it active, regardless of whether it uses electronics or not. Danny Aldridge didn't issue a formal ban. Instead, he told Ducati that approving the GP25 would set a precedent incompatible with the spirit of the regulation. In diplomatic language, that's a threat. Homologate this engine at your own risk. Back at the Ducati truck, the debates got heated. Daligna wanted to fight. He believed their interpretation was correct and that they could win any protest. Davide Tardozzi, Ducati's sporting director, was more cautious. The performance gains weren't massive, and the risk of a championship losing protest was too high. The internal politics at Ducati are fascinating. Daligna is the pure engineer. He sees a rule, finds a way around it, and expects everyone to appreciate his cleverness. Tardozzi is the politician. He understands that being technically right isn't always enough in the real world. This tension has existed at Ducati for years. The engineers want to push boundaries. The racing department wants to win championships. Sometimes those goals align, sometimes they don't. But the deciding vote came from an unexpected source, Marc Marquez. Marquez had been hired not just for his riding ability, but for his experience with championship politics. He'd seen firsthand how rule controversies could destroy entire seasons. His advice was simple. If you're not 100% sure it's better, don't risk 2 seasons of being stuck with it. Marquez's input carried enormous weight because he'd lived through Honda's development disasters. He knew what it was like to be stuck with a fundamentally flawed bike for multiple seasons. He'd experienced the frustration of watching rivals get faster while you're frozen in place by regulations. Because here's the thing about MotoGP's engine freeze rules. Whatever engine you homologate for 2025 is what you're stuck with through 2026. No changes, no updates, no second chances. The freeze rule exists for cost control, but it creates perverse incentives. Manufacturers either play it safe with proven technology, or they gamble everything on unproven innovations. There's no middle ground. Ducati made their choice. On the final day of testing, Tardozzi quietly announced to MotoGP.com that they would be sticking with the 2024 engine specification. The paddock erupted. Within hours, rival team managers were whispering that Ducati had been forced to abandon their new engine. Social media exploded with rumors of secret bans and regulatory corruption. But here's the truth. The FIM never officially banned the GP25 engine. They didn't need to. The threat of future protests and the uncertainty of legal challenges was enough to kill it. This is how modern motorsports politics works. You don't need to formally ban something if you can make it too risky to use. And the timing couldn't have been worse for Ducati. In 2027, MotoGP is switching to 850cc engines. That's a massive reduction from the current 1000cc limit. All the development work on the GP25 becomes useless after 2026 anyway. So Ducati faced an impossible choice. Gamble on a controversial engine for 2 seasons, or play it safe and focus on preparing for the 850cc future. They chose safety, but that choice came with consequences. The GP25 represented millions of dollars in development costs. Specialized pistons, custom connecting rods, unique crankshaft forgings, all of that had to be scrapped. Ducati estimates a 7-figure write-off just for the already machined parts. The supply chain chaos was enormous. Ducati suddenly needed 400 additional engines for their works and satellite teams, but based on 2024 specifications that suppliers thought were finished. Lead times for engine components are typically 6 months. Ducati had 6 weeks. Companies like Mali, who make the pistons, and Pankel, who forge the connecting rods, had to completely restructure their production schedules. Shell had to modify their custom oil formulations. The ripple effects touched dozens of suppliers across Europe. But the most frustrating part for Ducati's engineers was the performance data. Leaked telemetry suggests the GP25 was only marginally faster than the 2024 engine. We're talking about 2 kilowatts more peak power and 0.08 of a second faster acceleration to 250 kilometers per hour. In other words, they developed revolutionary technology for gains that might not even be noticeable during a race. The tire wear data was actually worse on long runs. If the engine had been dramatically faster, Ducati might have taken the risk despite the FIM's warnings. Instead, they had created a political firestorm over what amounted to tiny performance gains. The irony is thick. Ducati themselves had pushed for the engine freeze rules as a cost-cutting measure. Now they were being hurt by their own suggestion. Honda and Yamaha, meanwhile, are laughing all the way to the wind tunnel. As struggling manufacturers, they get concession benefits that allow them to keep developing while Ducati is frozen in place. They get extra testing time, more engines per season, and freedom to modify their designs throughout 2025 and 2026. The political maneuvering didn't stop with the engine decision. Aprilia's CEO, Massimo Rivola, publicly praised Ducati's courage, while privately lobbying for written guidelines that would permanently outlaw any self-adjusting mechanical valve systems. KTM took the opposite approach. Their technical director, Fabiano Sterlachini, who used to work for Ducati, argued that overly restrictive rules would stifle innovation. He pushed for gentlemen's agreements instead of legal prohibitions. Dorna sided with Aprilia. Within weeks, they issued Technical Directive 25/2025, which didn't mention Ducati by name, but closed the cam phasing loophole with surgical precision. The directive specifically banned any mechanical device that alters valve timing characteristics in response to engine operating conditions. No more centrifugal cam phasers, no more RPM-sensitive valve tricks. Case closed. But Ducati isn't giving up entirely. Their 2025 bike will use what insiders are calling the GP 24.9 package. Same proven engine, but with updated aerodynamics and chassis modifications that are still allowed under current rules. And remember, 80% of lap time comes from chassis and tire interaction, not engine power. Ducati's fundamental advantages in electronics, aerodynamics, and rider ergonomics haven't disappeared. Marc Marquez brings something even more valuable: championship experience under pressure. His ability to adapt to different bikes and his racecraft in wheel-to-wheel combat could be worth more than a few extra horsepower. The marketing department moved quickly to control the narrative. Within 48 hours, Ducati's website was talking about choosing proven reliability over unproven performance. The word banned never appeared in their official communications. But in the court of public opinion, controversy sells motorcycles. YouTube videos with titles like "Why FIM Banned Ducati's Secret Engine" pulled millions of views. Social media engagement spiked 20% week over week. The GP25 saga reveals something important about modern MotoGP. The rules have become so complex and detailed that manufacturers can spend tens of millions developing legal innovations, only to have them killed by political pressure and regulatory uncertainty. Today it was Ducati. Tomorrow it could be Honda, Aprilia, or KTM. Innovation will continue, but so will the cat and mouse game with lawmakers and competitors. The technical lessons are clear. In prototype racing, being right isn't enough. You have to be unquestionably, undeniably, legally bulletproof right. Gray areas are minefields, especially when your competitors are looking for any excuse to file protests. The human cost shouldn't be ignored either. Ducati's engineers spent 2 years developing the GP25. Imagine pouring your creativity and expertise into a project, only to watch it get killed by politics and bureaucracy. But that's the price of playing at the absolute cutting edge of technology. When you're pushing boundaries that hard, sometimes you step over lines that other people don't want crossed. For American fans watching from home, this whole saga might seem like typical European racing politics. And honestly, you wouldn't be wrong. The level of regulatory micromanagement in MotoGP makes NASCAR look like a free-for-all. But it's also a testament to how serious the competition has become. When manufacturers are willing to spend millions on tiny advantages, and competitors are willing to launch legal wars to stop them, you know the stakes are enormous. The 2025 MotoGP season will answer the ultimate question. Does Ducati's dominance come from the engine, or from everything else they do better than their competitors? My money is still on the red bikes. Marquez and Bagnaia on proven machinery, with the best chassis and electronics package in the paddock. That's a combination that should still be favored for both championships. But Honda's freedom to develop and Yamaha's concession advantages add genuine uncertainty. For the first time in years, Ducati might actually have to fight for their victories instead of just showing up and collecting trophies. The banned engine story isn't over either. Ducati is already working on their 850cc design for 2027. And you can bet that Daligna is finding new ways to interpret the rules that his competitors haven't thought of yet. The cat and mouse game between innovation and regulation continues. The GP25 engine may be dead, but its spirit lives on in the workshops of Bologna, where engineers are already plotting their next ambush on the rulebook. The GP25 wasn't just banned, it was sacrificed on the altar of politics and fear. But engines like this don't disappear forever. They evolve, inspire, and return stronger. Sometimes the greatest innovations are the ones too powerful to race.